What is a niche, and is it important for record labels? Should a record label have a niche or a micro niche or a sub niche? That's what we're going to discuss in today's episode. Here's a description of what a niche is, and this is kind of a common term. By the way, I'm saying niche because I'm Canadian, and I think it's Americans who say niche. Whatever you want to call it. Call it niche, quiche, niche, niche, whatever. Here's a description of what a niche is. There's a broad audience. Okay, so let's just say in any topic, in any field, in any vertical, there's a broad audience. There's just the main group of people. Then you have a niche. So you narrow it a little bit more. Then you can even go lower, and what you would have a sub niche or a sub niche or a micro niche. The crazy thing about niching is there's really no limit to how narrow you can go down and how farther down you can niche. Later in this episode, I'm going to show you how we can niche down as record labels by at least 4 layers. And I'll give you an example in a second. By the way, I'm putting all the information from today's episode on my website where you can go and read the notes to it. It's at otherrecordlabels.com/niche, Niche. I love when a record label niches down or has a niche or has some sort of specific thing that the label is known for, some sort of really intentional, unique passion. For example, on this show, just a couple weeks ago, we had a record label from the UK called ATA Records. And ATA Records specializes in soul and funk and this classic analog sound from the 60s and 70s. And when we did that episode, we had a bunch of their diehard fans leave comments and message me about how much they love that label. And one guy said that they buy everything that the label releases because they're so well respected and known for that vintage sound. Here's an example about how niches can make someone extremely passionate. And I'm getting a little bit personal here and maybe even a little embarrassing. But to tell you the truth, I love music, that's obvious. I love listening to music, that's obvious. But specifically, my favorite band is a band called Genesis. They're a 70s and 80s prog rock band. And I prefer to listen to that band only. And I specifically prefer to listen to their 70s catalog and their 80s catalog. I essentially listen to them on vinyl. A little bit of cassettes too, but I mostly listen to them on vinyl. Recently, I found out that there were several thousands or several hundred illegal live bootlegs that were pressed to vinyl in the 70s and 80s of this band. And they're made like with craft paper and photocopied inserts. And these things are really hard to find. They're very expensive, but they are available in some like dingy record stores. If you're willing to go and find these record stores and go into the creepy basement and dig for these records, they're out there. And I found a couple recently, and now I'm obsessed. Now let's look at this niche, for example, even though I'm sharing a little bit of personal information here. But let's look at this niche, for example. We have music, right? Then we have a certain specific band. Then how I like to listen to that band. And then the era of that band that I like. And then narrowing down even further to specifically raw live bootlegs that were recorded onto cassette and then transferred onto vinyl in the 70s and 80s. That's how specific, and I've become rabid about this. I like pull over to every like little sketchy record store in small towns, and I dive into their G section. And I've been joining Facebook groups of people who collect this stuff, and I've literally found like maybe 4 or 5 other people, some British dudes in their 60s who have the same passion as me. And it's what's really special about having a niche is that you end up creating this community, this tribe of people who are hyper specialized and hyper passionate about this really specific thing. Another great example of a record label that does this is a record label we had on the show called Hydration Records. And they're a gospel record label, but what's interesting about them is they're modern, and they do like modern pop and Afro pop and lo-fi beats, but it's all under the Christian gospel umbrella. And that's really, really specific. And it attracts a very, very specific demographic. And the demographic is just so happy that they have found this record label because they couldn't find this specific sound anywhere else. There's labels who niche down even more. There's a label called Waxwork Records that specializes in soundtracks and film scores of like horror and cult films, and they release them exclusively on vinyl. How specific is that? There's Conviction Records, a Scotland label for ex-convicts. And there's lots of labels we've had on this show that share a common mission statement with their fans. And so they might not have something aesthetically specific or sonically specific, but they have something that is, they have a shared set of values and ethics, and they share something like labels that aim to be carbon neutral, or labels that aim to preserve the language of their culture, who we've had on this show, labels who want to create a safe space for women and non-binary artists and who've had negative experiences in the traditional music industry. And so these are niches in themselves. They attract a certain audience, and an audience says, yes, those are my people. I agree with those causes. Those are my people. These types of stories, these types of identities for an individual record label is what excites me as a music fan. It excites other music fans. It excites me as a record label enthusiast and researcher, because instead of thinking about the broad category of just music or of just being a record label, that's not a novel thing anymore. It gets me really excited when I hear stories about labels that are doing horror movie soundtracks, or labels that are doing, something with a very meaningful cause behind their mission statement. I don't want you to stress and be like, oh, I don't have something that's unique about me. At the same time, I kind of want you to do it. At the same time, I do. We're going to try to find something that makes you unique. And I think it's something that if you can't identify today, I'm going to give you some pointers to help you identify it. But if you can't identify it today, that's okay. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe you start broad, and over the years, you find what it is. You find your community. You find what it is about your community that they love about you. And sometimes record labels actually already have a niche, but the record label owner themselves are not aware of what that niche might be. But there is something that their audience identifies and sees in that label, and is what draws that audience to them. There are 3 pros to having a niche as a record label that I want to talk about right now. Number 1 is it gives people a reason to check out your label. You become the label for that specification. You might repel some people, I understand that, but you're going to attract the right people. You become magnetic to the right people. And this helps you build an audience, because niches have pre-existing audiences. There are people out there, there are communities and groups of people who are celebrating whatever it is that you are celebrating and what that you're already passionate about. So all you have to do is go to where they're already congregating. Or something even more special in a case like Gospel Hydration is that these are people who knew that they wanted a certain sound with that gospel Christian message behind a certain modern day pop and Afro pop and urban sound, but they just didn't know where to find it, or maybe they just didn't even know it could exist. And then when a label pops up, they're like, yes, this is something I've been looking for, but I didn't know I was looking for it. So having a niche gives you people a reason to actually pay attention to you and your record label. Number 2 is it gives you parameters. What not to do is one of the biggest challenges for labels like us, because we have so many different opportunities. A niche will give you guidelines and say, you know what? I'm not going to work with these types of people who stress me out, or I'm only going to work with people who are super passionate. I'm not going to serve fans and customers who aren't of the same mindset as us. I'm not going to do formats that I'm not passionate about doing just because I feel like other people are doing it. I'm not going to populate social media channels like TikTok if I don't feel like my audience or our genre or our niche is relevant to the TikTok audience. So I don't need to stress myself out about doing that. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you don't have to worry about pressing vinyl and getting music into record stores. You can just distribute music exclusively on TikTok if that's your niche, if that's your audience. You might think that being broad is good, but really, it means that you don't have an identity. I mean, let's think if you wanted to get takeout food, right? You would say, okay, should we do Chinese? Should we do Indian? Should we do Lebanese? Should we do Thai? Should we do Italian? Nobody ever says, oh, hey, there's a restaurant that does all of those things. If there's a restaurant that does all of those things, you probably shouldn't eat there. I mean, okay, number 3 is that it creates passion and purpose. Niches allow us to have more fun with this job. Like I mentioned, it keeps us away from the people and projects that are stressful or are outside of what we're passionate about and what we're comfortable with. But it gives us an opportunity to meet people who share the same values and the same things that we get excited about. It creates a far more intimate connection with you and your audience, with the artists and their audience, if you are celebrating something really specific. If you're just celebrating music or rock music or indie rock music, that's maybe not. Or if you're just celebrating hip hop, that's maybe not going to connect with someone as much as if you were celebrating lo-fi hip hop, experimental hip hop from the inner city of Detroit, of a very, very, very specific thing that will really excite people, as opposed to just the broad category. And that's why it's important that we have our broad category, sure. Then we narrow to our niche. And then if we can, we narrow to our sub niche and maybe even a sub niche after that. So here's your action steps. Number one is let's define our niche. And the way we're going to do it, and I got a little illustration for you here, is we're going to try to go 4 layers deep. And so on layer 1, let's just say we're an indie record label. Okay, that's, we could even say layer 0 is a record label, and layer 1 is getting even more specific by saying we're an independent record label. But let's start with label 1. Layer 1 is an independent record label. Layer 2, in this example, this is just a rough example here. You're an independent record label from Detroit, Michigan. So if you're stressing about finding a niche, already we can say, listen, if where you're from is part of your identity, then you're already 2 layers into your niche. Layer 3, let's say we're an indie lo-fi jazz. So we're now, listen, I'm kind of skipping ahead here. We could even just say you could be an indie jazz record label from Detroit, and then go one step further and say, no, we're actually lo-fi jazz. So we're kind of more modern experimental jazz. So on layer 3, I'm saying we're an indie lo-fi jazz record label with artists exclusively from Detroit. So already we're eliminating so many other potential fans. And I know that's alarming to some, but really we're starting to now activate this intimacy and this excitement with really specific people. And as I use this example I've just made up, I'm like, oh, this sounds kind of cool. I'd really like to know this. This sounds like there's stories in this, right? When you think of like lo-fi jazz from Detroit, like who's doing that? That's cool. Tell me a little bit more about that. That sounds like there's a story. When you don't have a niche, you don't have an identity. It's like when somebody says, how are you doing? And you said, fine, thanks. That's like the most unintimate connection ever possible, as opposed to someone asking you a very specific question. How's your mother doing? Or how's your job at that place going? When you get more specific, you get more intimate. And then in this example, my 4th layer is an indie lo-fi jazz record label featuring exclusively Black artists from Detroit, Michigan. So all of a sudden now we're now 4 layers, and really I've kind of condensed this. We could even say we're 6 layers deep. And so I think you can go to otherrecordlabels.com/niche, and you can print this off, and you can do this exercise yourself, or you don't need to print this off. You could just do it on a scrap piece of paper. And it's something that you could work towards. Maybe you already have that niche. But if you don't, it's something you can work towards. You definitely have layer 1. You probably have layer 2. Let's see if we can keep on narrowing down. Number 2 is to focus on your niche. Now we've identified our audience. We're going to create a specific customer avatar. Start to find where they locate. Start to find other labels that are like you that you can learn from. Start to network with people who are within your niche. Just really focus on your niche. We've defined our niche. Now we really want to focus on it and start to build a plan on how we can do more with our new found niche. And step 3 is to own your niche. Become known for what you do. Create for your niche exclusively. Celebrate your niche. Host parties or release compilations or do merch that celebrates the fact that, hey, we're about lo-fi jazz from Detroit. Like, that's something to celebrate. We want to promote this community. Remember that community is more important than content. We often think about content. We often think about making releases or making social media posts, but the community, the people who love that stuff and support that stuff, is more important than the actual stuff itself. And then declare your niche wherever you can. If you are a lo-fi jazz record label featuring exclusively Black artists from Detroit, Michigan, that exact sentence should be in your Twitter bio, your Instagram bio. It should be the headline of your website. That will help you with SEO. We've talked about that. We talk about that in the book, Record Label Marketing Strategies. But declare your niche wherever you can so that people who come to you know, yes, this is my place. You might repel some people. You might say, oh, this isn't my place. That's okay. You're going to find the right people, and you're going to be super magnetic to those right people. I hope you found this helpful. This is actually from my new book, Record Label Marketing Strategies. A lot of what I pulled has come from chapter 1, where I talk about niches in the new book. So make sure you check out the new book. You can get all the notes from today's episode by going to otherrecordlabels.com/niche. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching.